right, so we're starting week 2 in our course. Yeah, so this one we went through the intro of all the stuff, getting vocabulary and all the base things down. Um, Now we're going to get into the beginning of building a house. And again, this is a very specific method in the way that I'm doing it. This is the way that maximizes efficiency over the course of a project. There are obviously easier ways to model if you're doing something quick, like a study model or whatever. Um, so again, this is just one very specific way that to me makes a lot of sense when you combine the overall goal of what we're trying to do. So today we're just going to go over some, quick model organization, why I have certain layers and scenes and all that good kind of stuff. We're going to go some over file naming, and then we're going to talk about how to import AutoCAD. And if you have a hand sketch, you can actually do the same thing, and we can briefly talk about that as well. Then we'll get into some quick modeling techniques, and then basically end with our basic massing, very quick, simple, basic massing, and then that should be it for today. And yeah, so there's going to be one additional plugin that will really help us. And in fact, I should have talked about it last week with the solids, but today is really when we're going to use it. So it's a good place to show it as well. This one is called Loose to Groups, and we'll get to that in a minute. And we'll also get to the login information so everybody can start downloading plugins. So a really quick overview. We've looked at this briefly before, but when you open your model, everybody should be set up now that we all have the same template, and if not, we can fix that later. And you'll see that there's this long list of layers. You'll also see that there's a bunch of preset stuff in here, and then you'll see there's a bunch of scene tabs, and essentially all three are connected, including what you're not seeing. Let me open that up, bring this over here, is styles. There's a series of styles that are built into this model as well. So all these things are kind of interconnected, which is why I built this this default template for everybody to use. So Leron asked me once before, in fact, I'm going to use my scene tab, I'm going to put everything on, and you can see all my layers turned on. It's just a helpful thing I like to use. So you can see that there's these random squares, something that looks like a chunk of earth, and a height guide. And the reason why all this is here is while I'm modeling, I like to purge stuff out of my model, just keep my model clean. And to get to that, my shortcut is I, which opens up model info, but I believe that's here under Windows, model info. And if you go to statistics, you see this purge unused. So if I, let's say I make a layer, I'm going to call this delete this layer, and I have this layer in my model, and I don't have anything on it right now. If I go and click purge unused, you see that that layer gets deleted. And really that's not that big of an issue. You can just make the layer again. But when I was talking about the interconnectivity of everything, you'll see that if I go to say scene 1, I have certain layers on and certain layers off. Scene 2, again, same thing, all the way to like my roof views, my Google Earth views, my section views. They all have different layers on and off. And so if I purged my model and some of these layers get deleted and I make the layers again, that layer will be on in every single scene tab. I don't know if you've ever run into that. Layers are automatically on in every scene until you turn them off. So I get around that by creating these boxes here, and these boxes are related to, in fact, if I click on this, if I come up here, you can see this general grouping of it all is on layer 0. If I double click inside here, you can see each one of these items is simply coordinated with a layer. Some of these you'll see I have a group of 3, which this one is site entourage, and this one will be site flora. And similarly, on my layer palette here, you see I have site flora in capital letters and site entourage in capital letters. And then you see I have these 3 additional entourage items and these additional flora items. And so really what this is doing is I have site entourage as a larger container. We talked about containers last time. So this is a larger container that I can actually turn entourage off. And you can see furniture, people, and vehicles, these are all still turned on. But since I'm turning off this larger container, they all turn off. Or if I have it on, I could then individually come in and turn individual ones off. It's just an easier way of controlling essentially AutoCAD visibility states, if that makes sense. So if I want to turn, well, if I'm working on something and I want to turn all of my flora off, I can just click flora and it turns off everything in one swoop versus turning these 3 layers off. Does that make sense? So yeah, so that's why some of these are grouped in a certain way as well. And so whenever you see a capitalized layer, that just means it's a larger group coordinated with these other layers that would be embodied in it. And similarly, I have an interiors one, and ultimately this interiors one's probably going to grow a little bit because we haven't done a lot of interiors, and this will probably be finessed as we really get into it. So that's the layers. That's why all these things are here, and you can see how they're all coordinated with my scene tabs. Where, and to quickly go over through all of these, I have what I call a Lumion tab, which will turn all the non-necessary stuff off and basically just leave my model, which prepares it for export out into Lumion, because the Lumion, you only want to have certain things, like you'll want to have flora off and all that kind of stuff, so that when I go into Lumion, I'm ready to go. All on is pretty self-explanatory, turns all my layers on. It just helps define things sometimes. I'm going to skip these axes right now, but I have white and faces, and white just turns the whole thing into a cardboard model if you want to look at it without materials. Faces we've talked about before, where I'm going to go back to my working tab real quick. If I draw a box and I have a face the wrong way, but it's painted, I don't necessarily see that the face is the wrong way, but if I click faces, it highlights green a face that's backwards. So it's just an easy way to find where faces are backwards. So that's what this is for. And really this comes in handy when you download models off the internet and not know if they're made properly or not. And if there's something that's funky about it, it's just a quick way of finding if a face is designed wrong or not. My working tab is basically turns everything off that I possibly can that's not related to working on a building. And so again, it's my working tab. I get rid of all my vegetation, all my entourage, all that kind of stuff, so I can focus on the building, which really speeds up SketchUp when you're modeling, that it's hiding everything else that's not important. And then scene is the reverse. The scene puts everything on that I want to make my scene look pretty. And essentially, these tabs here, this 0, 1 through 53, are my scenes. So all of these have the scene enabled, but one of the things that's really nice is scene is not, if I come to, where is it? Where's my scenes? Up there over here. If I come to my scenes, you can see that if I highlight this scene tab, my camera location very specifically is not highlighted. So I can be anywhere I want looking at my model. And if I click working and scene, and you can see it doesn't change my camera view. So I can use these while I'm working and not jump. And so if I go to click 001, you see it brings me back to my camera location. So this way I can continue working and change between working and scene and not care about camera view. So from a nomenclature standpoint, my 00 to basically my anything below 50, these are going to be my standard eye level perspectives. My 50s are going to be more of a bird's eye view perspective. And I think I was working out doing something with interiors. I haven't done it yet. And I'll create additional ones where I have a series of numbers meant for interiors. And really where this gets its advantage is when I use this plugin, export scenes to JPEG. It exports it out by these scene tabs. And so my scenes are exported out in the precise order that I have them set here. So I'm always going to have my eye level perspectives, my bird's eye perspectives, then my elevations, and then my roof plans, all exported out in that way. And it just really makes it easy to create a PDF and send off to a client and not have to reorder the PDF, if that makes sense. The section tabs are something, sections and floor plans are something that I'm using, but they're not really stuff that we send to clients. And so you can see that in my scenes tab, if I pull this back over, if I go to say section AA, you can deselect the include in animation, which is why it has these parentheses around. You can see if I click it, it takes it off, and click it, it puts it back on. And what that does is when I do this export scenes to JPEG, it does not export those images out. So it skips all those that are selected with include in animation. So this way I'm only exporting out what I need, if that makes sense. Everybody following? So again, this is a lot of just very background information that you don't necessarily need to know right now, but you'll see and understand why it's being used as we move through the next few months modeling a house and what the intent is and how it all is kind of preset and ready to go. Yeah, so that's really the setup for my model organization. And included with that was styles, which is how you can make the faces, the white, or my working and scene, and that's how those are all controlled by styles, and you just associate a style with a tab. In fact, I think we've talked about, I showed you guys this a little bit before. I haven't updated my template yet, but basically what I'm going to do is I have another style that I'm adding in that's called, I have the style built already. Where is it? Right here. This is the same style as you're seeing right now, except it adds in a logo, and you should see the logo popped up down here, so that when we export JPEGs, now our Affinity logo is embedded in every JPEG, which is what we should be doing. So we'll no longer even have to post-process that. It'll just come built in that way. And those will be associated with these perspectives, and really anything that we would export, I'll associate that scene or that style to that. All right, so we're almost done with the boring stuff, but one more thing, and it's actually going to be a fairly important thing that we just had a bigger meeting on with Mitch and everybody else in trying to coordinate Mitch's ease of finding SketchUp models to present to clients. Which is, we're going to, the first step that you need to know right now is the way I want to get everybody consistent in how we save projects. If anybody's ever looked at mine in the last 2 years, let's say, is in fact, this is a blank, ready to go project, and I'm just going to save it right now, which is actually going to lead into another discussion of that I have. I don't have it in here for me, but anyway, I'm just going to save it right here. But I have folders for everybody to put their projects in, and I'll show you that in a second. But ultimately, what we should be doing is putting job number, and then we should be putting location, and then client name, and then the really important part is every job I do now ends with this -00. But it's to me, I want to get everybody consistent, both in AutoCAD and in SketchUp, but everybody consistent with this naming structure, so that it's really easy to find. You have the job number, you have the location, you have the client. AutoCAD, it doesn't necessarily need this, but SketchUp we do, and I'll show you why in a second. So that's the way everybody should be naming thing. And again, the most important part is this -00. So if I save this and I'm working, and you'll see this as we move through the project. Now I'm working through this, and say I have these two sets of walls and I'm about to join them the way we've talked about in Solid Tools previously, but I want to save a copy prior to doing that, so I always have a copy with these separate and not joined. I come here, I go to File, and I use this Save a Copy As, and you'll see that it automatically makes a 001. So I click Save. Now you see I'm still working in my 00 because I didn't do a Save As, I did a Save a Copy As. So it makes an additional copy, even though it's keeping them in my original. Now if I join these two, I now have joined geometry that as I continue to work, I can't undo. But you'll see that if I go to File, Open, I have this 001 file that I can revert back to, even if I just want to open it and grab a piece to bring into my current model. So the way I want everybody to think about this is your 00 number will always be your linear iterations that you do. So as you need to save a stopping point, or a history state in Photoshop terms, you do that. You do a save copy as and you save, but you should always, I would say 99% of the time, always be working in the 00 file. This is your master current file. And so with that, anybody, if a job is done by somebody else and I need to go into it, I know without a doubt 100% that I can ignore everything else except for this 00 file. I've seen it where we all have done, the first file is 1 and the current file is, say, number 10. I've seen it where, it's today's date. A lot of those things in my mind can lead to some sort of user error when we're moving fast. If we keep it set up so that everybody uses 00, then it's just such an easily recognizable thing that we all can jump towards and know this is my latest file. And with that, I'm actually going to send an email out soon company-wide, because then what we're going to do is on the M drive, we have this folder called SketchUp Master Link. So the first thing you should do as a project manager is once you create this, this 00 file, let me open up this and this. So I have my 00 file, and then on the server I have this SketchUp Master Link, which this folder is going to be shortcutted in every conference room. You would simply grab this and do create a shortcut link into this folder on the server, so that now Mitch can go into this folder in the conference room, and he has a link to every single project we've ever done. And it opens it up, from the server, but he no longer has to search for things, and we don't have to make a copy of the file to put onto the conference room and then forget to do it later and not have the most current one. And again, you should always be working in the 00, so this link should always be active no matter how many times you save an iteration. Because previously, if you were to change the date on every new one, or create the next number up on every new one, this link would no longer be active, and you'd have to change the link every time. So again, there's multiple reasons, and again, we'll show these reasons as we go forward with other things as well. To keep this 00 as your constant will become very important. Yes. Right. So you're asking the question of if that opening this file, it is opening the active file. Absolutely, and this was actually discussed. You know, worrying about the active file being open and getting saved over with incorrect information. So without a doubt, it's an issue. And as of right now, we're looking at it as the lesser of two evils of project coordination between this. Part of it is going to be an education of everybody in that these are active real links to the real project, and to yeah, but creating copies is what we're doing now, and the system does not work. We can have this discussion later. You know, it doesn't need to be part of this class. But we've gone through. We had a task force over the last week and a half discussing this uh, to create this ability, and this is really the best way that we've come up with. But again, we can definitely have this discussion later. Uh, Yep. So not to cut it off, we'll finish this discussion later, and we could even email more about it. I don't want to take up time right now to have that discussion. But yes, you are correct. It is a concern, and it is an education in both Mitch and everybody else to properly use it to know that these are real files. Um, and yes, there are ways that you can do your own backups to ensure that you always have copies of it as well. So again, we can talk more about that later. Um, so the really important part right now is just to understand the naming convention that I want everybody to use, regardless of how we do the SketchUp availability for the conference room. So then now this is going to bring us into working on an actual project. I have a project that I'm going to open. It's a very, very basic model home that was actually done in 2005. But I'm going to basically build this live in front of everybody over the next 4 months, doing every individual piece. I chose this project because it was simple enough for us to be able to do quickly, but also that it has a 2-story piece. It has stairs, obviously, and it has a circular tower, just to add in an additional level of difficulty, of how to handle circles and all that sort of stuff. So there's definitely plenty of houses that are much more difficult. But again, I want to build this live in this class so that everybody can see the process live. So with that, I know there's 2 ways of importing, essentially importing the full CAD file, which is I think what most of you do right now, if I'm not mistaken. And I personally avoid that because you're bringing in way too much information that's just not needed. And within the layer control, it opens, it brings in all those AutoCAD layers, and it just starts to convolute your layering system. So what I do, I bring in the information that I need. And all I simply do is I go to my 0 layer and I create a polyline, because all I really care about is the outline of my house. Now, I'm actually going to skip over this round rotunda, and you'll see why in a second. And I'm just going to, draw perpendicular to here. I'm really, even if I had additional arches or arcs or whatever, I would skip over them. Anything that has a circular nature to it, I skip over, and it's going to go back to the discussion we previously had about adding in segments and segmented arches and all that stuff, that I want to be able to control that from the very beginning. And so I'm just going to finish this up. And so you can see now I have, I think I just need to bring my zero layer to the top. I have a zero layer, and then I need my second floor, which is easy enough. And just to verify, I know that these are going to be, should be a specific distance, which they are not. Yeah, this was done many, many years ago. So I'm actually going to, I'm going to move this just so I know it's exactly 250 feet. It doesn't really matter where you put it, just use a consistent number. So I know that my second floor is exactly 250 feet away from my ground floor. So then to deal with my tower, I'm going to create a just a quick triangle and put it at the center, just so I know where my center point is for my tower. And the only other piece I need to know is actually right here, and that my tower is going to be a 6'2" diameter. I don't need to bring in any kind of marcation or anything like that. I just need to know that it's going to be a 6'2" diameter tower. And something else that's not in here that I'm going to add in anyway, because I think it's a pretty cool trick. You know that if you draw a line in AutoCAD and you cut it, so Control X and then do Control Shift V, it pastes it back in as a block. So it's just a quick way of making a block. And I very specifically did a line from the bottom left to the upper right, because that gives my insertion point at the bottom left. The insertion point is always the bottom leftmost point of anything that you copy and paste. Like even if I were to grab, a bunch of just random lines, I did a cut and paste to make a block. You can see that where this comes down and this comes down, that's my insertion point. So that's why, I do it like this, just so I can have my insertion. I know exactly where my insertion point is. So I'm actually now going to make a, let's do a 12 by 12 square, because I'm going to make a column. Even though these don't have columns, I'm going to add columns to this. And for whatever reason, I like putting the insertion point right in the middle of my column. So I'm going to edit this block. I'm going to erase this line and add this to my working set and save. So I now have this block that has an insertion point in the middle. I'm going to move this, say I want to put it here and here. So I want to have columns at the edge of my porch. And you'll see why that I went through the trouble of making that into a block here in just a second. And as a side note, know that SketchUp brings AutoCAD blocks in very well, but it does not bring in dynamic blocks at all. So that's another issue with bringing in the full CAD file, is a lot of our stuff has dynamic blocks, and that creates an issue with SketchUp. So now that I have my very, very basic information, I really don't need a whole lot more from my floor plan. Actually, I do need one more thing. Yeah, this one does not have a covered front entry, but I do want to draw the line for where my covered porch is going to be. I mean, I could draw that in SketchUp. It doesn't really matter, but I do want to bring that in. Ideally, I have that. So I'm just going to grab all this. I'm going to W block it out. I believe it's just W in AutoCAD. It should be the same for everybody. And I actually keep a folder on my desktop. So on desktop, I have a folder called desktop stuff. And ultimately, I have a folder called delete, to where I know anything that goes in here, I'm not keeping permanently. It can be deleted at any time. And I just drop this new block. I don't care what it's called. I just drop this new block into my delete folder. I'll overwrite whatever is inside there. That's fine. So I just created this block so that when I come to SketchUp, I can go File, Import, and part of the nice thing of having that delete folder, this is 99% of the time where I'm bringing stuff in, it automatically brings me right to there because that's where I brought in my last thing from. And I'm just going to bring this file in. And so here you go. Here's pretty much everything that I'm going to need to build my house, to build my basic massing model. And that's really, again, all we're going to today. We're basically building walls. We're not building roofs. We're not cutting holes for doors. We're basically making the floors and the walls. And that's really it today. So as a note, when you bring something in from AutoCAD, you can see this brings it in as a component. I don't want it a component. I want it a group. So I'm just going to Shift X to explode it. And then I'm going to deselect my second floor and do Control G to make everything on my ground floor a group, and then Control G up here to make everything in my second floor group, which is pretty minimal, but you can know that it can get very, very complicated with a lot of our houses. So what I want to deal with first is just my my first floor. So what's this? This brought something else. This brought this block in. I didn't realize that was on the 0 layer. I'm just going to delete these lines because I don't need them. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to use this same set of lines 3 different times because I'm going to use 2 sets to create my foundation and 1 set to create my walls. But before I do that, I need to address making my tower. So I'm actually going to come out of my group because I don't want any lines to intersect with anything. And if you remember, the diameter of my tower is 6'2", and you can see this comes in, very segmented. These segments are approximately 20 inches, which is way, way bigger than I really want. And if everybody remembers that if I select my circle, I can change the segments. And I'm actually going to go to a 92. That seems to work really well and smooth it out really well at this scale. In fact, this might even be, that creates almost a 5-inch segment. So if I even wanted to from there, I can double that, even go, 184, which would make it very, very smooth. And honestly, there's nothing wrong with doing that on something that's only going to be used once. You can only change it while it's a 2D object or 2D shape. Once I extrude it, even though I can select it, you can see it's telling me my segments are 184. It's grayed out and I cannot change it. Even if I select both of them at the same time or select the whole thing, there's no way of changing it. So it has to be done before you turn it into a 3D object. So for my own insurance, what I like to do, I'm actually come back in here and grab, this is my center point of my turret. I'm going to turn that into a group. I'm going to cut it. I'm going to come back out and turn this circle we created into its own group. And then if you remember, Control-Shift-V in SketchUp is paste in place. If I just hit Control-V, it's paste and I can put it anywhere. But Control-Shift-V puts it back exactly where I copied it from. So it has the exact same origin point, which is exactly what I'm looking for. And that's going to become very powerful as we move forward doing a lot of different things. And so I'm actually, the insurance I'm going to take out is I'm going to copy this down 10 feet. So I know I always have this original circle that has these original line segments that I can come back to that will have an impact later on as I model. So now I can actually grab this guy. I'm going to Control X to cut it. I'm going to come back into these lines, Control Shift V to place it exactly where I want it, and then explode it. And then by exploding it, I can erase all this stuff. And now if I come back here, you see that I have the exact outline I'm looking for, but these segments will now perfectly align with this circle. Does that make sense why I'm doing it that way? Because, you know, once I get to my second floor, I'm going to need a full circle, and this way my full circle will perfectly line up with my quarter circle. So now that we have this, I'm going to make, let me get you out of the way now. I'm going to make 2 copies. I'm just going to do it 150 feet, just again so I know where they are. And this is going to be, I'm going to make just a 12-inch thick foundation that will have a 6-inch step down for porches. So I'm going to do essentially this in 2 6-inch slabs, and you'll see why in a second. So the first one, I want to ignore any porches. I just want it to be the full slab. So you see I can come here and turn this into a full slab, and I'm going to turn this up 6 inches, select everything, and turn it into a group. So right now I have a 6-inch slab. I'm going to take this second copy, I'm going to turn this into a group, move it up 6 inches, and then I copied it over 150 feet, so I'm going to move it back 150 feet. This time I don't want any porches, so I'm going to get rid of all porches. I basically just want my AC or my wall outline. I'm going to turn that into a face, and then turn that into another 6 inches. And so now you see I have, this is my 12-inch foundation with a 6-inch step to a porch. And then using our solid tools that we discussed last week, I'm going to hit alternate C, which is my, you can see it activated my outer shell command. And I can select number 1, select number 2. I just built my foundation. I'm going to X-ray mode. You can see that this is now one solid object that has a step down in a porch. Again, there's many ways of doing this. You could have just done the 6-inch piece, you added in these lines and pulled it up 6 inches. And so again, whatever works best for you. But when it gets into much more complicated, where you're having porches everywhere, you're having this, you're having that, to me, this is just the easiest way to build. I build each piece at its own specific limits as what it needs, and then I put everything together. So this is essentially my foundation. So then this is going to become my walls. So I'm going to copy this up 12 inches and then over 300 feet. Turn that into a group. And again, I don't need my porch. My columns, I'm actually going to drop back down 6 inches so they're sitting on the slab. But now I can come in here, and I'm going to turn this into a face just like before, but I'll offset this 8 inches. I'll delete, and then I'm going to pull this up, say 122 inches for a 10'2" beam. So you can see just like that, you can see that exactly what I did can probably happen in a matter of about 3 minutes. Much shorter than the time it takes to actually explain it. And then with the magic of what we did, these columns that we actually made as blocks within SketchUp or within AutoCAD, when SketchUp brings blocks in from AutoCAD, it turns them into components. So you see I can now edit one, and it pre-placed and pre-created components for me in the model. I'm actually working on another project right now that has the same balcony in like 8 different places. So all I did was create an outline of the balcony, made it a component or a block in AutoCAD, copied it where I needed it to, and then I built that balcony once in SketchUp, and it created it 8 times throughout the model. So there's just a lot of power to be had in creating, specifically creating blocks in AutoCAD and bringing them into SketchUp. And so from here, you can obviously see we can create the column as fancy or as simple as we want. And in fact, while we're waiting, I'm gonna, or I'm actually gonna open up a file and show you how to even replace that. Columns. I'll show you what I'm doing in just a second. And so while I'm waiting for that, I'm gonna grab the second floor. I know I need to copy it or move it over 250 feet. I'll pull it up to my, essentially my 0, 0, and then say I know that our second floor is at 12 feet. I just move this up 12 feet from there. And so just like we did before, I'm gonna come inside my second floor and I'll make an additional copy of this. I'm just gonna move over 30 feet. I know that's all I needed. And I can pull this floor system down to the top of beam. And so there's my flooring system. And so I'll turn that into a group. And I'm going to turn this into a group, move it over 360 feet, offset 8 inches, delete the inside, and say we know we only want 9'2" as the beam for the second floor. And that's it. Like, that's essentially our massing for what we want to do. Oh, one more thing I need to grab. I'm going to grab my, essentially my tower element. So I'm going to copy that to the top of the beam. And so again, I know that these are going to all match up perfect. I'm going to offset this 8 inches for an 8-inch wall. And I'll bring my tower up to the same height. And so really the power, if I hit W, which is my shortcut for hidden geometry, this is the beauty of the system that I use. You can see that every one of these lines all matches up perfect, where if they didn't, when I tried to join these two sets of geometries, I would have big problems. And really I can show that very quickly. I know we've talked about it before, but you know, let's say I put an arc here. Let's do this. I'm going to make a circle at 3 feet. I'll make a copy, get rid of this. You know, say AutoCAD brings this in as, you know, 12 segments, and I pull this up, and that same one that I copied, if I were to have brought this in, you can see that we have some issues here where this geometry is not lining up correctly. So that's why, going back to the beginning, that I create this circle as which is going to be the template that I build anything that has anything to do with my tower off of. Yeah, so ultimately, you know, this is my my massing model. From here, I would need to add a roof, which is what we're going to do next week. But that's as simple as it is as making a massing model. There's really not much else to it. Obviously, a much more complex house will have more going on with it, but it's going to be the exact same process. And you'll see how that all works, you know, once you get into your projects. No, this is, again, I can create this in a matter of about 3 minutes. You know, so to me, this is the streamline process. Yeah, I know that there is the eggshell method, or what I call the eggshell method, where you literally just bring this outside in. You know, you pull this up, you copy this over, and again, there's nothing wrong with this. You know, where this is essentially your massing model that you're going to design with, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's just you're going to limit yourself on 2 factors: on what you're going to be able to do with this model when you're done with it, because you don't have any interiors to it, and if you wanted to edit something. Again, this is a very simple model, so this one's pretty easy to edit. But doing this, where everything is being kept as solids, if I really wanted to chunk out something here, you know, we're really going to do something different here, I can use my solid commands. Whoops. I'll make this into a group, and I can use this and start deleting out geometry. And really, this is going to help out on roofs. When roofs are super complex but kept as solids, you can actually cut off a piece of roof extremely easy and rebuild it to what you need it to be. Where if it's more of this eggshell kind of geometry, it's much more difficult to deal with that way. And the only way to truly explain it is as we move forward in this. I'll try to show you why things happen throughout the process of the project versus trying to show you every scenario that can happen right now. So this is really just my method of modeling that I've developed over the last 12 years, and the experiences I've run into and how to eliminate the issues that I've seen. This method is not perfect. There's definitely pros and cons to it, and just like there's any other, but to me this has the most pros versus anything else. Specifically, this is going to be made to what we can call constructability quality, that just like you and I work on projects, I can export this out knowing that this is going to match up precisely to the floor plan and create construction drawings from this. So at this point, I would probably do my file save a copy as, which I'm just going to rename it back to this 001, and click yes, just so I have, this is kind of I've built the mass, and I'll save it out and move on. Ultimately, which I'm not going to do right now, I try to hold off as long as I possibly can. But ultimately, what I would do, once I get to the point of essentially completion, is I'll join all of this geometry together. Why is this not a solid? Oh, not a solid because I had the columns inside of it. I can join all this geometry, and now you can see it creates that same effect as doing the other version, but you have your walls and your floors and all that kind of stuff built in. So you just have a lot more information built into it this way. I don't like joining all the geometry in the beginning because I have a lot more freedom of how to get into and manipulate certain things. Especially this way, I can hide my second floor all together and just work on the ground floor. But I'm sure most of you have seen that working with Mitch, he doesn't like to see these lines, and I get it because it changes the look of the geometry. It makes it look much more horizontal than it does. Right. Sure. So you're right. So you're asking if we wanted to stretch. Say that we wanted to make this. Client comes back. We need to reduce square footage. Let's reduce this by 3 feet. There's a little bit of fat in here. We can reduce this by 3 feet. There's two ways. The simplest way is you come in here and you move each one of these items back 3 feet, which is definitely time consuming and one of the cons to the way that I model. But there is an additional plugin that I use, and it's this one right here. In fact, there's two plugins I want to talk about, so I'll talk about how to install this one in just a minute along with the other one. But what this one does is it allows me to, you can see that I'm outside. I'm in a bigger container, and inside of this, this is a group, this is a group, this is a group, this is a group. So I'm outside of all of the groups. This allows me to cut through all the groups, and you can see the vertices that it's selecting. And then from there, I can say I want to stretch you 36 inches. So this one actually eliminates one of the cons to the way that I model back into a pro, that I can, manipulate items that are contained within groups very quickly now. One other thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you're asking about bringing in, complex sills and what are just really complex geometry in general. So, and how to stretch that. So yeah, you can definitely use this where uh, I can. Yes. So two things could be happening if you're stretching complex geometry. One of the things I always do, like this one doesn't have it because you can see everything in here is orthogonal. There's no curves in this. If this one were to have a curve, then there's hidden geometry. I'm trying to think if I actually come back in here and add another layer of detail real quick. So if you're trying to stretch this, more than likely, you can just come in here and grab this whole side and just move it. But sure, sometimes what happens, and I never remember how to actually recreate it as to when and why it happens or doesn't happen. But sometimes what happens when there's curves involved, there's this essentially hidden geometry because curves are never really curves; they're just multiple segmented arches. That with hidden geometry off, sometimes for whatever reason it doesn't grab that geometry correctly, and it starts to mess it up. So whenever I stretch something that has a curve in it, I always turn hidden geometry on first and then stretch it, and that seems to eliminate the problem most of the time. But at the same time, this actually cuts through all of that nonsense. You can actually, because this specifically looks out vertices and moves the vertices, so I would be able to stretch this. And again, using this as an example, say this was a block, or I have a group for a sill and a group for a header. Instead of coming in and saying I need to stretch this over an additional 12 inches or whatever, I can come into the window and then just grab both of these and stretch. So that's just another way that you can use that. And another quick thing. So I actually have a file open here that has multiple different kinds of columns and whatever. And I'm actually going to grab this geometry for this column. And going back to this column here, stating the obvious, I'm going to turn this into a group and then paste this column in its place. This column is actually a little bit bigger. So this actually might happen. Yeah, you see how that's getting distorted, Luis? It's because there's hidden geometry that it's not grabbing. Like you can see that it's really creating some sort of issue. But if I turn on my hidden geometry and then do it again, you see that it stretches no problem. So that's a perfect example of at least I think of what your question was. So then I can come in here, basically replace that geometry, and now I have two nice looking columns sitting there. So that's just, again, going back to the power of bringing in a block from AutoCAD and allowing that to become components inside of SketchUp. So that's basic massing. There's not a whole lot to it, and there's nothing really difficult about any of these steps we're going to talk about over the next few months. It's really just breaking them down into such small chunks that really makes it easy to think about, and it becomes a process, and you use the same process over and over to build a model so that you no longer have to think about how to build a model. You're just thinking about how to design the model or how to be an architect versus how do I build a model. So with that, there's I'll go over these two these two plugins. In fact, that's going to go over one other thing as well. On the server, on the M drive, I now have this folder here called SketchUp Masterclass, and this is going to have everything in it. So in here, this has the Word document syllabus that I use. So if you want to look at that, this has the login information to log into the that everybody should be using to download plugins. This way, everybody is using the same login, and it's going to make coordination easier as we move forward. And then this folder here, this reference files, I have it broken down to every chapter, which is going to coordinate with the syllabus that the Word document syllabus. So this was last week's, which I have that Solid Tools demo that I did. That's inside there. The reference files for this week, nothing's in it yet, but I'm going to include the essentially these AutoCAD files along with these polylines that I created. So all of that will be in there for reference, as well as my SketchUp file that I created along with this project. So everything that we do in this week is going to be inside. Everything we do in the week is going to be decided shown in that week. And then also I have this folder here called user projects, and obviously inside here is going to be a folder for everybody. And I'm going to do my grad school project like you were talking about later on. So I'll put that in there. So in here, so let's go into Felicia's. Though this is the way I set up every SketchUp folder for my job files. Is inside of here is going to be your SketchUp file. So this would have your 00 master as well as any additional iterations. But that's really the only thing that should be seen once you go into your main SketchUp folder. Everything else should be inside this stuff. It just makes it easier to find things. So inside of here, I have 3 additional folders where I put reference stuff. Let's start there. I put any CAD files that I use, to build my model. Any markups that I get, from clients or Mitch or Brian or whatever, I put in there, and any original sketches. So any hand drawings or where everything came from, I put in there. So it's just an easy way to have all my reference stuff ready to go. Which actually reminds me something I wanted to mention before. Felicia, you're talking about you have a hand drawn by Mitch, not a CAD file. Really, it's no different. The same way you would do a block out, like you bring your JPEG file in and you scale it correctly, and that's how you start blocking out. All you would do is just, draw a polyline to the correct dimensions that you think it's going to be around that hand drawn. Does that make sense? Sure. Yeah, in fact, let me open up, see if I can find a project real quick to show. Trying to remember what the last project I did that way was. I think I did it with coarse shade. Yeah, you're not going to do construction drawings from SketchUp. You're going to do essentially the modern version of our hybrid set. Hybrid set used to be Brian would draw elevations by hand while we did floor plan CAD. Now it's a floor plan CAD and SketchUp elevations. And yeah, and Luis has done that many times, so he can definitely help you out on that. And that's going to be part of what we do in this class that we'll have documented, and it's a very simple thing. Yeah, even if it's to a basic level, I was hoping this had it in there, but it doesn't. Um, yeah, yeah. So this is obviously a much more complex house, but the way I would attack it, because as linear as a process as I'm going to make this class appear, we all know that it's a very fluid situation. You start in floor plan, go to elevations, elevations influence floor plan, which you go back, and so you're always going back and forth. So it's a very fluid type of setup, and it works fine, and it's really the same thought process. You just go like step 1, 2, 3, back to 2, and then back to 3, 4, back to 3, then 3, 4, 5. So you just kind of jump back and then move forward again. But the way I would go about it is I would not fully block it out, but I would start blocking it out. Say, I draw my center line. For the most part, all houses I start with a center line. There's usually a main focus that everything revolves around. And in fact, you could even see it on the sketch here. He didn't dimension this as 22 feet. He dimensioned it as 11 and 11. Um, very specific to uh, what he wanted. And so I wouldn't necessarily worry about certain minor rooms. I'd really just get the main ones down. So I have this. I can see that this wants to be 24 feet from here. So I pick this point, copy it, 24 feet, to whatever it needs to be. Yeah, like it's essentially a very loose. You draw your 8-inch wall and you copy that wall around, and so you're not saying that this is going to be the final. You're getting it, probably like 90% accurate. You're getting it as close as you can be. Where my blockouts at the very beginning probably don't even have vanities and showers and all that extra level stuff. It just has the bathroom is going to be, whatever the size needs to be, and that's what I'm showing. And then we will start building and massing and pushing and pulling, and so you're kind of working at both at the same time. So sometimes, with that said, sometimes Mitch wants you to do a full block out to send to a client before you go into SketchUp, and then you do a full block out, which you essentially end up with this uh, to start your SketchUp model from, doing a full block out. So you could either have, turning off all of this stuff. Let's see what else I can turn off. Yeah, I mean, even to like, this might even be a little further along, where you just have most of, like, again, like even like all of this specialty stuff I wouldn't even worry about if I'm looking to do a massing model. Like, I'm really looking to get, my goal is to get this polyline, but some interior rooms influence where that line needs to be. So I do just as much interior as I need to decide what the exterior is going to be. Does that make sense? Okay. So yeah, so getting back into here. So that anyway, so that's where you should store all this stuff. So you always know where your CAD files are, your markups, and your original sketches. It's just an easy way to find stuff. Old is if you have you basically get to a point where you're going to do a major redesign to the project. I usually date where I'm at and then copy everything into a folder and move it into old and start over. You know, if my project isn't salvageable from where it is, or you just continue on either way. Images are where I export out my SketchUp images to, and the Lumion images. You know, once I get to that point. But the great idea is that, again, everybody should know that your main SketchUp file will be here. You can come in here, and here's my SketchUp images. So I know exactly where all my images are. So the idea is that everybody can find everything pretty easily. So I think I added these in here so everybody has a user project folder to add everything to. Yeah, so that should be it with that. This plugin here, apparently, I think we tried finding it last time I was down there, no longer exists on the SketchUp warehouse or the extension warehouse. But I do have it on the server, which to install it, let's see, I have it, let me go back to the server, under SketchUp. So in the graphics folder, SketchUp stuff, there's SKP, and then there will be SketchUp plugins. And it's this one right here, this T2H. And the way that this one gets installed is you activate the extension warehouse, which is this, if you don't already have that on, that should be, what is this one called? Just warehouse. So you just right click and warehouse and just turn it on. And it's this one here, and when you hover over it, you'll see it says extension warehouse. Actually, I take that back. You install it under extension manager, which I think there's a different way of getting to it. I'll have to look at it and show you another time. But it might even, yeah. So if you go right, I created my own icon, but if you right click and go, you'll see that there's extension manager, and that's how you turn it on. And that's this right here, which is the same thing. So once you get in here, you click on install extension, and then you just navigate to the SketchUp plugins and double click it, and it'll install it. And that's how you install that one. And there's a whole bunch of other ones, and we'll get to those as we move forward. So if you want to install everything, you're welcome to, but you can also wait until we get into using them all. So that's for this one right here, this stretch by area, which is the one that allows you to do this kind of stretching. The other one is you do use the extension warehouse, and this one is called Loose to Groups, and it's made by Chris Fullmer. So in fact, I think it'll actually be CLF, which Ella assumes is his middle name for Chris Fullmer. CLF Loose to Groups, and you can just click on it and then install. And what's really nice about that is you can have a bunch of stuff and you can see that none of these are groups. These are all individual parts. If I select everything, I have his Loose to Groups, which is extension, I believe, where's Chris? Yeah, Chris Fullmer Tools. Loose to Groups, you can see I have Shift G as my Loose to Groups. I just hit Shift G, and it turns every one of these into a group automatically. So it's just one of those really nice shortcuts that you can make groups very quickly. And in making groups, it turns it into a solid, so that I, then can join or subtract out or whatever. So it's just a quick way of making groups of multiple items. Okay, so those are the two plugins that we're dealing with today. Loose to Groups and Stretch by Area. Trying to think of anything else. That should be about it. One other thing I'll mention, yeah, I usually keep my house, everything that's contained in my house as its own group. And the nice thing is I can actually move my house or hide my house very quickly, and that does the whole house. This other item here that everybody has seen, this black square with green grass, this essentially is going to be my my ground plane. And in fact, if you come into my entity info, you see that this is already on the layer site earth. So it's just part of my layering system that I can turn my ground plane on and off easily. And then inside of here, you can see everything inside of here is just on layer 0. But my grass, I can essentially stretch, to have whatever size I need for my my site plan. And we'll get more specific into site planning later of how to bring in boundaries and all that good kind of stuff. But I can just say plop this thing right here, and now I have a ground plane that's already set up for me to work off of. So that's why that black square grouping is there. If it never made sense before, hopefully now it does. It's just, part of it is just like before of when I purged the model, because like at this point I can come in here and say purge unused, and it just gets rid of any material that's not being used, any components, all kinds of stuff that can eat up file size. It just gets rid of everything. And if I have, if I paint this, you can see inside of my material palette has that stone. But if I delete this, it's still inside my material palette until I hit purge unused. Well, I think it's because that's active. If I hit purge unused, you can see it deletes it. So I kind of like having my grass and this basic charcoal color available in my model, because I use it in every single model. So this way I have a square that's already painted, and so these materials are built into my model. So that's why that's there. So that's pretty much everything for what I wanted to accomplish this week, along with much, much more. Making sense? Anybody have any questions on what we did today? Yeah, like I said, this whole class, again, could probably be done in about 3 minutes of actual work. But I'm trying to go further in explaining the as to why, and the alternate methods and all that good kind of stuff. Yeah, so I would, in fact, I'm going to, so I would just save, and that's it. If I wanted to, knowing I'm going to go into the next step, I can also have done a save a copy as, which I've already done as my 001. And so now my 001 becomes a placeholder in time. So I'm basically capturing this model at this moment. No matter what I do moving forward, I'll always have this model in this moment, because maybe at some point I want to come back and I just need this second floor. So I can grab this, and so maybe at some point when I would have combined all of this geometry together, and it's like, what, I want to build a completely separate different second floor, or something changed or whatever, from using solid tools, I can actually create what I call a cutting box, that I can select this, hit my subtract command, and subtract out that second floor. My second floor is now gone, and I can paste in place my original second floor that I had saved previously. Does that make sense? So it just allows you to have flexibility. And honestly, I don't use it a whole lot. It's pretty minimal how much I use it, but I have used it, and it's been nice to have these moments in time that I'm calling them to jump back to. But you can see I'm still in my 00, and that's always going to be my current master file. You don't need to go back and change your previous projects. If you wanted to, you're welcome to. There's no real need to do it. It's more of this is how we want to do it moving forward. All right. All right, so all this stuff that I just showed you, like these SketchUp files and these CAD files that I'm building this off of, I'll copy into that master job file, or the SketchUp masterclass file inside like the reference files and stuff. So I'll do that and a little bit later today and upload the video and have all that good kind of stuff. So, you know, we're not meeting again for 2 weeks, so you should go through and you know, take your project and try building just to this point. You know, just essentially your foundation, your walls, and your second floor structure if you have one. Pretty simple. All right. Have fun, guys. Thanks.